So what we've been looking at in trigonometry is how to find out the unknown angles or sides of non-right angled triangles. And one of the ways that we can do this, and the simplest way that we can do this, is using the sine rule. So the first thing to remember when we're using this rule is to be able to use the sine rule, we need one angle and its corresponding side to be able to use this rule. So what I mean by that is that, for example, on this triangle here, we've got the angle of 48 degrees down here in this bottom right hand corner. Now the corresponding side to this angle is this one over here, the 6.4 centimetres. So when we're using the sine rule, it's important that we've got that corresponding pair to be able to use the sine rule effectively. Okay, and the other important thing is, so in this case we're finding the length of an unknown side, which is our x centimetres. It's important that we've got the angle which is opposite that side as well, this 34 degrees here, and we do. So we can apply the sine rule. So remembering that our sine rule says that sine A over A equals sine B over B, where the capital letters here are our angles and the lowercase letters here represent our sides. So the first thing that we can do here is actually label our triangle a bit so we know what we're talking about. Okay, so it doesn't matter what letter you give what angles or sides, but the important thing is that you give the corresponding angle and side the same letter, just one uppercase, one lowercase. So we're going to call this angle here A. We're going to call this angle over here B. Therefore, the side opposite B will be lowercase b, and the side opposite the angle A will be lowercase a. Okay, so now what we can do is we can put this into the equation. All of the values can fit into this sine equation here. So we know capital A is 48, so what we're going to have is sine of 48 divided by A, which is 6.4, is equal to sine of 34, which is our B here, over X, which is the side that we're trying to work out. Now, remember, when we look at the sine rule, we've actually got two versions of the sine rule. Okay, so we can have the sides on the bottom or we can have the sides on the top, and it's the same. Okay, it doesn't change the equation because what we're looking at is the ratio between that angle and side. So if we rewrite the equation like this, okay, it's actually going to make it a lot easier for us to rearrange in this case. So what you're looking for with which of these two to use here is you're looking at what unknown you're trying to find. In this case, we're trying to find the length of a side. So we want the sides to be on top of the equation. This makes it easier for us to rearrange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this equation with the sides on top. So I'm going to now have 6.4 over sine of 48 is equal to x over sine of 34. Now we multiply both sides by the sine of 34 because we want x to be by itself. Okay. Over this side here it cancels out. And what we are left with is x is equal to sine of 34 times 6.4 divided by sine of 48. Okay, and now we enter this into our calculator. And when we do that, we get an answer of 4.82, rounded up to 2 decimal places. We have to make sure that we've got our units correct. So our units, the lengths of our sides were in centimetres, so this is 4.82 centimetres. Now, one thing to check on your calculator when you're using it is that the mode of your calculator is in degrees and not radians. Otherwise, you won't. You'll find that these calculations aren't correct. So all the angles that we're measuring are in degrees. They're the units for our angles. So we want to make sure that our calculators reflect that and are set to the same thing. So now let's look at an example of when we're trying to work out the unknown angle here. And it's exactly the same the first step. We're going to label the angles and sides. Okay, so let's label this angle here A, and little a is the corresponding side. Now straight away we can see that we've got an angle with its corresponding side or its opposite side. So we can use the sine rule here. Okay, we've also got, we're trying to find this angle X up the top. Okay, and we have the side that's opposite that angle X here down at 38. So we're going to call, let's call this B, and this can be lowercase b over here. Okay, so this time we've got the angle as the unknown, so we want the angle to be on the top of our equation. That's the form of the sine rule that we want to use here. So if we have sine of B over B equals sine of A over A, okay, so what we're going to have then is, if we put all our values in, sine of X over 38 is equal to sine 58 over 45. Okay. So now we want to rearrange this equation again because we want to find this value of X. Okay. So if we multiply both sides by 38, cancels out on this side, what we're left with is sine X equals sine 58 times 38 divided by 45. Okay, now remembering that we want to actually find this angle X here, we need to also do the opposite to sine on both sides, which is going to be what we call the inverse sine. Okay, and what this looks like on our calculator is this. It's the sign with the little -1 button. Okay, so we want to make sure that when we perform this inverse sine operation that we're calculating the rest of everything else first and then applying the inverse sine to the whole calculation there. So when we enter that into our calculator, what we get for X is 45.7 degrees. So that's the size of our unknown angle X. So for the sine rule, that's usually the two things that you'll be asked to do. So pretty straightforward, but the important thing to remember is that you need at least one angle and its corresponding side or opposite side to be able to use the sine rule.